Gente, sapete che ogni tanto vi porto qualche documentario interessante e oggi è la volta di un qualcosa che sta riacquisendo un pochettino di peso nel dibattito, specie dopo la, a quanto pare, col tempo definitiva acquisizione di Warner Bros. Da parte di Netflix. Si è tornato a parlare un po' di Shadow of Mordor e Shadow War, ovvero Shadow of Middle-earth, i grandi giochi di Monolith con il Nemesis System, che purtroppo è stato non solo abbandonato, ma adesso Monolith non esiste neanche più. Io sono uno di quelli che ne vorrebbe davvero un altro, davvero tantissimo, però non so se lo avremo mai. Beh, c'è questo documentario che parla proprio di questo, dello sviluppo, delle cose, di come è andato, eccetera. È del canale Gamers con la V, e abbiamo visto anche altre volte questo canale, è molto carino. E il documentario è un po' lunghetto, però secondo me vale la pena, d'accordo? Quindi, come sempre, ragazzi, ci cuffiamo e passiamo alla schermata principale. Via l'audio di sottofondo. Pronti? Eccolo qua.
J.R.R. Tolkien's genre-defining The Lord of the Rings has been translated to video games nearly 36 times. Beam Software took the first swing with the Hobbit software adventure in 1982, developing a text adventure wherein players followed Bilbo Baggins on his quest to reach the Lonely Mountain.
Che figo.
This revolutionary experience set the stage for the next 4 decades of licensed games based on Tolkien's works, with some releases leaving more of a lasting impression than others. Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor occupies the same upper echelon, due in large part to the groundbreaking Nemesis system whose complex inner workings turned enemy NPCs into user-specific villains. The title's 2017 sequel, Shadow of War, stumbled in its execution of an even more robust iteration
Che
of the
figata di
signature
gioco, quanto mi
mechanic.
manca.
Shadow
Madonna.
of Mordor capitalized on the success of the Batman Arkham series, which
Yes.
showed publishers that licensed games had outgrown the perceived need for movie tie-ins, as players would happily invest time and money into original stories featuring their favorite characters. While WB Interactive Entertainment learned the right lesson in this regard, many have argued the opposite with respect to how the company handled the microtransaction boom that rocked the industry throughout the late 2010s. Shadow of War in particular became mired in controversy for its intrusive in-game purchasing options.
Me lo ricordo molto
Such drama
bene.
severely tainted the otherwise well-made sequel. Thus, the momentum
Pensi che
gained
lo
by
daranno ad
Monolith
altri Nemesis
Productions'
System? Secondo me no.
award-winning efforts years prior
Secondo me se lo terranno
ground to
e
a
non lo
screeching
useranno.
halt overnight.
Temo che andrà così.
Worst still, the developers never redeemed themselves since the Middle-earth follow-up unexpectedly represented their swan song. This is the rise and fall of Middle-earth.
Per chi si è connesso solo adesso, e lo dico solo ora, questo è un documentario su ascesa e caduta di Shadow of Middle-earth, che sono Shadow of Mordor e Shadow War. Questi due giochi fatti da Warner, nella fattispecie fatti da Monolith.
Or really big bugs.
It's Letter Island, and here comes Emily the squirrel and Robbie the raccoon on the reading rover. I come here all the time to learn to read.
Questo non ho idea di
Robbie.
che cosa diavolo
A
c'entra.
number of Monolith Productions' founding members earned their stripes in software development at Edmark
Ah,
Corporation,
ok.
taking part in the
I
creation
primi
of
giochi di
educational
Monolith, ok.
software such as Millie's Math House for school-aged children. Monolith set up shop late in 1994, but would not release its first game until Blood landed on PC in 1997. The cult classic FPS marked just the start of Monolith garnering praise for implementing inventive gameplay features. Several other interactive
gli shooter
experiences
anni
came out of the
90,
Kirkland,
sì.
Washington headquartered outfit in the years that followed. Alien vs.
Qualche
Predator
esperienza
2
programmatore
and
zero,
Tron 2.0
ma non mi ha
counting
mai
among two of
interessato.
the most notable. Major changes
No, questo non è
sat on
Doom,
the
è Blood.
horizon when Monolith inked a deal in 2002 with Warner Brothers and Eon Entertainment, which saw the three companies collaborate for The Matrix Online. In January 2004, more than a year before the MMORPG's debut, Warner Brothers doubled down on its gaming endeavors by establishing WB Interactive Entertainment and recruiting Monolith co-founder and CEO Jason Hall to lead the new division as senior vice president. The media conglomerate acquired the development studio during the summer of that same year, a period wherein Monolith had a pair of internal teams concurrently building the two first-person horror games
Io
primed
spero
to
anche che
significantly
esca
raise
un
its profile.
seguito che utilizzi il
Fear
Nemesis System,
and
ma
Condemned
io
Criminal
ne dubito,
Origins.
ragazzi,
Each
purtroppo.
title enjoyed varying degrees of critical and commercial success. The former even benefited from a second wind after Day One Studios deployed console ports for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Notably, unforeseen challenges decelerated the Fear franchise's expansion at more than
Alien
one
Isolation
turn. The first
a me non è
obstacle stemming
piaciuto
from
tanto,
Activision
però è un
Blizzard
bel
retaining
gioco.
the publishing rights following its
faranno un
merger with the
seguito.
IP's former owner, Vivendi.
Sì, il sistema Nemesis è
Warner
brevettato.
Brothers
Sì.
purchased the rights in September 2008, permitting Monolith to proceed with development on a sophomore entry that arrived in
Sì, lo so,
stores
ragazzi,
5
che il
months
franchise di
thereafter.
Lord of the Rings
Despite their parent company's
sotto
efforts,
Netflix
though, some
non ha
staffers at
una buona
Monolith were eager
reputazione.
to move on
Lo so
and
bene,
had no
tipo
interest in
Rings
doing
of
so
Power,
with
sì,
a
lo so.
third Fear installment. Day One Studios led production on Fear 3 as a result, so the Washington state-based outfit's dual teams could explore fresh ideas whose widely different frameworks laid the foundations for what eventually evolved into Middle-earth's Shadow of Mordor.
Che figata di gioco,
This is
Madonna.
where the magic
Shadow of
happens.
Mordor,
This is
quanto
where
mi sono
Fear 3 is
divertito.
being made. This is the center department. These are my old digs.
With Day One Studios working on the next Fear, Warner Brothers gave Monolith Productions the opportunity to pitch new projects based on existing WB properties. Former developers told YouTube channel Did You Know Gaming that Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight and Rocksteady Studios' Batman Arkham Asylum sparked internal interest in an adventure starring the Caped Crusader.
Vabbè, trilogia di
At
Batman
some point
Arkham,
in
una delle mie
2009
preferite
then,
di sempre,
one of Monolith's
probabilmente.
production teams began
simpatico,
incubating
grazie
a
mille.
game codenamed Project Apollo. Instead of
Ho
telling
anche
an
poca
original
fiducia nella
story
nuova
like
trilogia
Arkham
Hunt for
Asylum,
Gollum. Sì,
the
anch'io.
developers envisioned an
Staremo a vedere.
experience set in Nolan's Dark Knight universe. However, the studio needed more than WB's seal of approval. Reportedly,
No, I'm not
Project
human.
Apollo
No, quello
would
mi
only
manca,
see
lo
the
devo
light of
provare.
day if Nolan signed off as well. The Apollo group didn't waste any time while patiently awaiting the director's response and immediately entered pre-production. It was decided early on that the hopeful movie tie-in would boast a sprawling, open-world Gotham City that players traversed in a drivable Batmobile modeled after the Tumbler. A level of verticality not present in other Batman-branded games represented another top priority. Thus, Monolith planned on littering the map with skyscrapers and tall structures for varied movement
Quanto vorrei un
options.
nuovo Batman Arkham
In
e
terms
quanto
of the
vorrei un nuovo
moment-to-moment
Shadow
action,
of
one Project Apollo
qualcosa.
artist claimed Batman would have tackled most scenarios by relying on three
Stime
different
migliori di tutti che ho
approaches,
visto. Grazie
namely
mille.
stealth, melee combat, and the use of gadgets. In pursuit of these goals, the studio worked tirelessly to expand upon the proprietary LithTech engine that powered Fear 2. It proved nothing short of a Herculean task, considering how much the scope of Project Apollo dwarfed previous LithTech titles. Development efforts on Apollo persisted for well over a year, yet aimless direction prevented a clear vision from ever taking shape. The general structure of the experience remained somewhat vague, according to sources who spoke with Did You Know Gaming. Some ex-developers said one concept prioritized linear missions woven into a freely explorable sandbox, not unlike Insomniac Games' 2018's Spider-Man. Supposedly, the absence of a fully formed vision stemmed from uncertainty about whether Apollo would actually take place in Christopher Nolan's then-ongoing Dark Knight trilogy. Monolith had no luck getting in contact with the famed director. A few developers argued Nolan's hectic schedule probably explained his unavailability, especially since he was in the middle of production on 2012's The Dark Knight Rises. Yet another theory posited the director may have been put off by the idea after the Batman Begins tie-in from developer Eurocom, which did receive his approval, failed to meet a certain standard of quality.
Sapete che non lo so se Monolith ha fatto un Batman?
WB Games' former general manager Laura Fryer corroborated the latter hypotheses in a
esatto.
since-removed YouTube video.
C'era Laura
revealing that
Fryer di mezzo.
When we finally spoke to Nolan, he didn't want us to do it. According to Fryer, despite middling review scores for the interactive Batman Begins title, Nolan considered it a disaster and did not want a repeat of the experience. Monolith shelved the project in 2011 following 18 months of pre-production. Apprehensive about squandering their efforts, the developers tried retooling the Project Apollo build into an original Batman tale. Rocksteady's
Seguo da
repeat
poco i tuoi video, mi
success in
fanno
this
morire,
department
grazie mille.
aroused concerns over potentially overcrowding the market. So the Apollo crew
Madonna,
tabled
tutte le
its
volte che
Gotham
arrivano
City
delle inquadrature di
escapade and
Batman
shifted
Arkham
focus towards
mi
a
sale una
completely different
nostalgia
Warner
e un
Brothers
hype.
property. Oddly enough, the second Monolith team had already
I brevetti
gotten a
videogiochi
head start.
andrebbero aboliti come se facessero su film. Dopo.
While one part of Monolith's workforce labored on Project Apollo, the other was busy with Project Hydra as early as 2010. A third-person Lord of the Rings venture meant to capitalize on the then-upcoming Hobbit films, Project Hydra promised an original plot and two-player cooperative gameplay centered on an unlikely duo, an elven assassin and a dwarven hunter. The pair would have set off on an odyssey through Middle-earth's Mirkwood Forest with a linear story guiding every step forward. Monolith designed both with unique playstyles, the dwarf named Gorvin brandishing a hammer, while the elf's sword and bow combo proved more agility-driven. Meanwhile, the developers split the action between combat and puzzle platforming sections, and even tinkered with light role-playing elements. In 2011, WB Games executives viewed a demo of the work in progress, but the pitch didn't gain any favor, with one source telling Did You Know Gaming that higher-ups were unconvinced by Hydra's lack of a firm creative direction. Reportedly, there were also trepidations regarding the viability of a fully cooperative narrative-centric game. That Monolith had cast both lead characters as fantastical beings raised red flags too, due to hesitancy surrounding the questionable marketability of non-human heroes. Production on Project Hydra ceased in mid-2011, forcing the developers
Quindi
back
niente
to
da
square
fare.
one where they abandoned
Non
cooperative
sapevo che ci
mechanics and the
fossero
non-human
questi
protagonists.
tentativi falliti
Over
precedentemente.
time, Monolith's Lord of the Rings endeavor evolved into something far grander in scope. Linearity gave way to an open-world structure, for example. But projects Apollo and Hydra left indelible marks on what came next.
Madonna, che
Their
bello.
pre-established technological advancements and gameplay concepts resurfacing during the making of Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. The bones of Apollo were particularly vital, given that its Batman Arkham-style combat was leveraged for the new game. Developers have said the Nemesis systems similarly blossomed out of Monolith's canceled Dark Knight tie-in. Yet that version of the feature randomly generated
Madonna,
Gotham
quanto vorrei
City
rigiocarlo,
criminals.
guarda.
As such, it should come as no surprise that the AI
Uno
behavior in
moderno,
Shadow of
però.
Mordor, where the player character could intimidate enemy NPCs, originated in Apollo.
Esatto,
However,
c'è il
even
Nemesis
with
system.
many of the core elements etched in stone, the production crew occasionally found itself struggling to translate Tolkien's fantastical world.
In this world that you yourself have made,
Nella fattispecie questo è
the
Shadow of Mordor.
complexities that exist mostly, it seems to me, outside the creatures of the world. There is an absolute evil and there is an idea of absolute good. Would you agree?
Production on Shadow of Mordor began in 2011, with a few noteworthy problems rearing their head from the outset. For starters, both of Monolith's teams helmed the project as a single unit, constituting the first time that much of the studio worked together. Integrating two relatively independent entities into a cohesive whole demanded new
una sorta
production
di
processes
RPG
for
open world
efficiency's sake.
avventura
The company had
nel mondo
never
del
tried
Signore
its
degli
hand at
Anelli.
third-person open-world action games
Credetemi,
either. Plus, the
provate a
developers were
giocarlo,
just
ha un
learning
po'
the
di
ins and
anni,
outs of 8th-generation consoles.
Però, mio
With
Dio,
this,
quanto è
many
bello.
firsts stacked up. The Shadow of Mordor developers had their
I
work
Nelle potere
cut
sono una
out for
cacata
them.
pazzesca. Sì, sono
Design
d'accordo con
director
te.
Michael
Ho visto
Duplata
le prime
expounded on the
puntate
litany
e
of struggles and
ho
triumphs
detto
in a
neanche
postmortem
per
for
idea.
Gama Sutra. The unfamiliar challenges Monolith encountered begat untold levels of uncertainty and insecurity. Consequently, the project's early days fell victim to overscheduling and exceedingly ambitious efforts, whereby an abundance of resources were spent on peripheral systems like side activities and so-called epic features, a number of which landed on the cutting room floor. The inclusion of climbable great beasts constitutes but one such idea that later got shelved, and it wasn't the only forcibly abandoned concept. Duplata lamented
E poi
how
passano progetti
Monolith's
come
failure to establish
Vegas.
good metrics for production capacity in the pre-production
E poi che
phase
succede?
culminated in the
Che sei
specification of
così
the
messo
game
di
being
merda che
over-ambitious.
finisci
Their
acquisito.
plans felt too wide-spanning. So once studio leadership
Appunto.
finally had a clearer picture of how Shadow of Mordor would shape up in the end, big and painful cuts proved inevitable. An overestimation of production capacity caused what the design director labeled a double dip of pain. Firstly, extensive work went into building features that were ultimately jettisoned. Developers, in turn, spent more time and effort than anticipated on crafting fresh content because something had to fill the space previously occupied by climbable great beasts, and so on. What kept these hurdles at bay was the studio's ability to at least maintain a consistent schedule, thanks in no small
Principalmente per non
part to the
competere con
deployment
Arkham,
of
ma secondo me
consumer-facing
c'era
demos
spazio
and
per entrambi.
deliverables no
Perché
more
c'è
than 3
stato
months
spazio per
apart
entrambi,
on
sono
the
andati
road to
benissimo
launch.
tutte e due.
While some industry veterans viewed the likes of E3 showings
Vengono
as
molto amati
distractions from their
entrambi.
already busy schedules, Monolith treated these exhibitions as a blessing in disguise. Each public showing held the outfit accountable by reinforcing the need for accurate scheduling and a clear alignment of
Obsidian
goals to
sa
ensure
scrivere
targets
bene,
for the
ma
game's
realizzare
final
non
quality were met.
tanto all'atto pratico, già. Che poi anche lì scrivere bene, forse, non so, sta cambiando un po' la cosa anche lì.
Most games
Oh, la
set in the
versione
Tolkien
Lego.
universe have either retold tales from The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or carved out side stories that run parallel to iconic events in the books and films. Monolith thought it best to expand on the
Lo
mythos,
studio è stato chiuso, sì,
specifically nestling an
Monolith,
unheard of
ma
odyssey
il
in the
brevetto è di
decades-long
Warner
gap between
e
Bilbo
probabilmente
Baggins'
fra
heyday
un
and
po',
that of his
quindi
nephew
sarà di
Frodo,
Netflix.
all while Sauron's return after his defeat at Dol Guldur simmered just beneath the surface. The new epic
Scrivere bene
apparently
Obsidian, quello
spawned
fanno
from
più
a
da Outer
mandate by
World.
WB
Mo hanno
Games
ripreso
to
Tim
focus on
Kaine, quindi
quality and innovation.
vediamo che cosa esce
It
fuori fra un
helped
po'.
that Monolith received the full support of Tolkien licensor Middle-earth Enterprises, director Peter Jackson, and Jackson's digital effects company.
No, se poi
Weta
romanzi
Digital.
esistono, non ci
Each
sperate,
source
ragazzi,
gave the
è
Shadow of
molto
Mordor creators
difficile.
room to craft their own little corner of the Lord of the Rings
La sera mi sei
universe.
simpatico, grazie
Weta
mille.
worked with the team directly for its part. And Middle-earth Enterprises provided a library of knowledge and Tolkien
L'articolo
scholars
scritto e fu
for
cancellato
purposes
proprio
of
per non competere con la
continuity.
serie di Arkham.
As for the
È una
story,
delle
the
ragioni,
Mordor
ma
setting seemed the most fitting once it became
il
clear
fatto
the
è
game would
che
adopt an open world structure. The
se
idea
vai a vedere
manifested
le
from a desire
vendite
to show fans an iconic
sono andati
landscape in
piuttosto
ways they
bene
hadn't
entrambi
yet seen.
e si
Monolith
ricordano
grounded
con
its endeavors in
tanto
the themes of
piacere
Tolkien's
questi
work
qua.
while pursuing such a feat, primarily leaning on the late author's argument that there
Tutti i film
cannot
Warner
be
Bros.
any
finiscono
story
su
without a
Netflix,
fall.
potenzialmente.
Thus, the Shadow of Mordor narrative explored the nuanced
Immagina
dynamics
tu la
of
prossima serie
power
TV Lord
and
of the
how it
Rings in mano a
affects those
Netflix.
who set out to wield it for good, but inevitably take a turn
Beh,
down
considera
darker
che,
paths. The defining character arcs of
come vi
Boromir,
dico spesso,
Galadriel, Gollum, and Saruman all
le mode
heavily influenced the
culturali
creation of Lord of the
cambiano.
Rings' newest tragic hero, Talion. By the time Shadow of Mordor's tale begins, the villainous Sauron has been gone for several generations. A dedicated garrison of rangers protects the frontier of Mordor as a safety measure, standing along the Black Gate in case the land's former lord ever reemerges.
Sì.
When Sauron does start mounting a return, he directs his loyal forces to secure the Black Gate. Talion's comrades, along with his wife and son, lose their lives in the surprise attack. He too dies amid the slaughter, and soon thereafter resurrects under mysterious circumstances to answer the ever-tempting call of vengeance.
What has happened to me? You are banished from death, cast adrift between the worlds of light and dark. Curse binds us together within the walls of Ardar.
Oddly, Talion returns with a passenger of sorts, a wraith named
Esatto.
Celebrimbor bearing its own identity and agenda, albeit with no understanding of what bound it to the deceased ranger. Monolith and lead writer Christian
bella sta
Cantamessa,
dinamica,
whose
l'ho
writing
adorata.
credits include the original Red Dead Redemption, especially drew inspiration from the duality of Smeagol and Gollum when drafting this aspect of Talion's origin. The two spirits occupying one host motif benefited the Shadow of Mordor gameplay as well. Crafted atop the foundation of Project Apollo and designed to mimic the genre's best offerings, the melee combat was always going to incorporate the rhythm-based button presses and counter prompts players knew from the Arkham series. Duplata explained in a sit-down with Game Informer
free
for
flow,
the Shadow of Mordor
il mio
cover story
combat
that
system preferito.
Celebrimbor's presence significantly augmented the combat mechanics, courtesy of wraith abilities capable of
Già,
complementing the
e
veteran
se ti
ranger's
potenzi
moveset.
bene e sei
Through
bravo,
a skill tree
diventi
divided
una
into ranger
macchina da
and wraith
guerra.
branches,
Madonna.
players could unlock abilities geared towards stealth
Documentario
and melee
Rise and
tactics,
Fall
or
of
hunting and domination powers, respectively.
Shadow of
Such a
Middle
role-playing
Earth.
approach
È sul
provided
canale
ample means
Gamers.
by which players could craft their own vision of Talion. Balancing the dual but married playstyles hardly counted as the only gameplay challenge with which developers had to painstakingly contend. By most accounts, implementing the Nemesis system engendered multiple obstacles, some cropping up in the nascent phases of the process.
Bloody more Uruk where I come from, you stupid shrug! You coward! He's nothing but a man, and all men bleed the same. Swine!
Won't get away from me, no you won't. I'm gonna find you. Promise that.
GameStop might want to watch out because Walmart is entering the used video game sales business. Walmart will soon let gamers trade in their old video game discs for
TikTok a me limitato pensando la live fosse appena registrata. Ha voglia, tante volte.
In the twilight years of the seventh console generation, publishers took note of the increasingly popular resale market. A sizable portion of the user base found comfort in buying physical games and selling them at retailers like GameStop for a fraction of the original cost or store credit. Frugal consumers would then purchase those used copies at lower prices, their money going directly into the storefront's coffers while developers and publishers received nothing. As ex-Warner Brothers executive Laura Fryer later disclosed, data analytics revealed more people were playing than were paying. This revelation fostered trends such as tacked-on multiplayer modes and online passes designed with the intent of boosting a new title's replay value, thereby giving players a reason to not sell their games. WB Games tried a different tactic with the launch of Batman Arkham City in 2011. For a time, there existed Catwoman DLC only accessible to those who purchased a brand new copy of the game or paid for the extra content a la carte. When considering the same conundrum for its next single-player endeavor, Fryer claimed Monolith quickly sidestepped the notion of multiplayer components and instead conceived the Nemesis system. Having previously incubated a version of the mechanic for the canceled Batman project, the studio prioritized two goals when retrofitting it for Shadow of Mordor: crafting systems that empowered users to create unique stories, and leveraging the power of the PS4 and Xbox One through innovation. Said innovation started with the somewhat simple notion of personal villains, before wading through quite a bit of feature creep wherein the idea grew overly complex and thus drifted far from the initial premise. In his post-mortem, design director Michael Duplata recalled one concept involving multiple Uruk factions with captains whose influence determined orc behavior in combat and certain missions engendering a hierarchy UI that resembled an unruly Christmas tree. Fortunately, extensive playtesting refined the Nemesis system. Its final form improved, but largely in line with the original conceit.
Ti dava effettivamente la possibilità di far rivoltare certi contro altri e era veramente interessante.
Vulnerabilities and fears. These NPCs remembered their defeats at the hands of Talion, adapted to user behavior, and even organically gained promotions within the hierarchies of their respective factions. The feature's dynamisms generated instances that saw orcs grow stronger. Those who Talion successfully intimidated would bring their war chiefs out of hiding. And if one foe happened to kill the ghostly ranger, his inevitable return incited a fear response. Combining gameplay systems, technology, AI, character art, and storytelling mechanics helped achieve the feat, thanks to the cross-discipline collaboration between internal departments. Suffice it to say, this incredibly collaborative gameplay element became the cornerstone of Shadow of Mordor and Monolith's future.
Di nuovo ragazzi, hanno un po' i propri anni alle spalle questi giochi, però siccome li trovate veramente a due spicci, vi consiglio di provare a rigiocarli. O di giocarli per la prima volta se non li avete giocati, sono veramente bellissimi.
Unveiled Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor in November 2013. The first few details
Ti piace l'America?
outlining an
Yes.
original dark story of retribution. The press release described the protagonist as a deceased ranger resurrected with wraith abilities and a thirst for vengeance. Furthermore, WB's marketing write-up touted how choice and consequence would ripple through every fabric of the experience. The real selling point lay nestled in the promise that Shadow of Mordor would introduce the action genre to never-before-seen gameplay mechanics, with player action shaping enemy relationships and characteristics. Monolith developers struggled in their attempts to explain the Nemesis system and its nuanced application, despite their best efforts. Michael Duplata later spoke on the matter in the post-mortem he authored, lamenting the burden of explanation during public demos and interviews where breakdowns of the feature sounded more systemic and mechanical than intended. In this regard, the design director applauded players and reviewers who better communicated how the Nemesis system deeply impacted their personal interactions with enemy forces.
Yes, era proprio questo il
Interestingly
punto.
enough, fans sharing in-game stories online inspired the post-launch edition of a dedicated photo mode. The game itself
Sì, è
arrived in
veramente
September
fantastico.
2014 for PC, PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One to predominantly positive review scores.
Credetemi,
Shadow of
giocateci.
Mordor
Lo
received
so,
universal
hanno un po' di
praise for
anni,
its free-flowing
però
combat, effective RPG elements, and
se
the
riuscite
masterful use
a
and
passare
expansion of the
sopra
Lord of the Rings
a questo
lore.
fatto, sono
Critics
veramente
especially lauded
bellissimi.
the Nemesis system, though some took umbrage with how quickly the features started feeling gimmicky. The tedium involved in luring out war chiefs with repetitive tasks also diminished the system's luster. Monolith supported the game for months with new character skins and 2 DLC story missions. The first DLC mission, The Lord
qui
of the
però,
Hunt, included an homage to Project Hydra's dwarven protagonist Gorvin, who garnered mention as the murdered brother of Torvin, the Wolverine-inspired dwarven hunter on whom the expansion centered. Later, the second expansion, entitled The Bright Lord,
Stanno
placed
invecchiando
players in the
benissimo
role
e
of Talion's
insomma
ghostly companion,
Shadow of
Celebrimbor, while
Mordor
he
comincia a
battles
soffrire un po',
WB Games eventually
Anche
bundled
Shadow
both
War,
story
ma
packs
soprattutto
and
il
more
primo.
into a Game of the Year edition that gave the celebrated action title another pop on the sales charts. To the chagrin of fans, the sequel would not be owed the same reverence as its predecessor.
For vengeance against Sauron's forces. It's a story that doesn't make total sense for hardcore Tolkien scholars, but it is well acted.
The incomplete storytelling, combined with a series of tepid final encounters, unfortunately softens the impact of the game's conclusion.
Some might not find the game very difficult. The Uruks can be pretty oblivious at times, failing to notice you stealth slaughtering their entire garrison, or missing opportunities to strike because you're performing a special attack. Anyone who's mastered the counter system...
Every critique leveled against Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor was taken to heart. Speaking with The Verge in March 2017,
Sì, non è un gioco perfetto, ma secondo me con molti più punti positivi che negativi.
Freely acknowledged the limitations that held back the first title's overall scope. So named to avoid the insufficient tacking on of a number, Shadow of War represented a chance to fully realize the big blockbuster version of the developer's ideas, which Duplata likened to James Cameron going from Terminator to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. These blockbuster-level aspirations were best exemplified in the improvements planned for the Nemesis system. More in-depth Nemesis mechanics necessitated larger-scale battles, too. To this end, Monolith set its sights on evoking the epic scale on display in the Lord of the Rings films, specifically Return of the King. The studio accordingly crafted a narrative that could support its new ambitions, the main premise revolving around Talion and Celebrimbor building an army capable of defending the realm. Set in the 60-year period between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, the Middle-earth series provided its creators ample wiggle room to explore uncharted territory in Tolkien's world. Shadow of War, in particular, was conceived with the notion
Impossibile fare una cosa così ambiziosa. Purtroppo no. Non gli è riuscita. E maledizione, però la potenzialità c'era. Pensate adesso, con i mezzi di oggi.
Flowing seamlessly into the existing mythos, while illuminating some understated elements. For its part in the narrative, Shadow of War would see Talion wield a new ring of power forged by Celebrimbor to confront Sauron and his Nazgul, or Black Riders, in a monumental battle for Middle-earth.
Questa è stata molto rischiosa come scelta, ma secondo me è bellissima.
But firmly believed compromises were imperative in certain instances to serve Talion's story. In a
E secondo me hanno fatto
interview,
bene.
Duplata told VentureBeat, people should think of the Monolith projects as adaptations that honor the intention, spirit, and themes of the novels, but adapts them to fit within a slightly different timeline. The delicate balance of conveying intentionality and specific
secondo unico anello che ha una natura un po' strana effettivamente, però si sono immaginati qualcosa di nuovo, ci sta. Madonna che belli i momenti finali del gioco in cui guarda quanta gente c'è, però se sei bravo e potenziato abbastanza fai un disastro.
Shadow of War developers made a concerted effort to coherently and consistently relay the motifs surrounding death, undeath, domination, and Sauron's goals.
Sì.
More closely
E tutta la
marrying the Nemesis
dominazione
system to the main story
degli orchi
helped
che
bridge
fai
that
tu,
gap.
strappandoli a Sauron. Veramente bello, bello, bello. Il problema è che in questa dinamica hanno inserito delle cose brutte.
In conceptualizing an expanded version of Shadow of Mordor's villain-oriented feature, Monolith Productions knew it wanted to position the conquest of Mordor as the player's primary goal within an all-new Nemesis system. The next adventure for Talion was then crafted around that notion, with the team hoping the system would no longer feel detached from the rest of the experience. This line of thinking begat the creation of a different class of reactive NPCs called followers, orcs for Talion to recruit for his cause. WB Games and Monolith repeatedly stated throughout Shadow of War's marketing that orcish allies opened the door for new stories about betrayal, loyalty, and revenge. The sequel additionally overhauled the trademark system by introducing
non è proprio la
Nemesis
marcia degli
fortresses
spiriti, ma
that served
quasi.
as control points Talion must attack for an opportunity
Per far
to stake
l'evil nel
claim over a
secondo
specific region of the map.
è
Upon
qualcosa
achieving
di
victory,
diverso.
Talion could install an overlord of his choosing and, in turn, alter the environment in which the conquered stronghold resided.
È presente il
So not
momento
only
Evil
would no
Queen di
two players share
Galadriel?
the same enemies
Assomiglia
and
un po' a
allies,
quello,
they'd also have unique,
se non ricordo male.
personalized worlds. One widespread criticism lobbed at Shadow of Mordor highlighted the repetitiveness of Nemesis encounters. The studio spent an exhaustive amount of time and effort combating the issue by implementing handcrafted elements into the system's procedurally generated functions. During a discussion with Game Informer, lead designer of systems Chris Hoagie attributed the handcrafted feel of Shadow of War's Nemesis scenarios to a curation process, whereby developers analyzed the procedurally generated content and removed parts that didn't work as well as their counterparts. Hoagie noted that from there, the developers took the best situations and identified an in-game moment that best fit that particular mold. For instance, an allied NPC betraying Talion because of their lust for power would manifest as the perfect orc candidate to ambush the ranger while complaining about feeling held back. The designer added that those on the outside looking in typically viewed procedural generation as sticking things together, yet Monolith's approach involved taking bits of glory and throwing them in as highlights. Monolith didn't solely reserve this depth of character for Talion's growing forces. Sauron's motivations for strengthening his army were considered as well.
Ehi
Said
Nico,
considerations
sai cosa
culminated
fare?
in the developer imagining a new subspecies of trolls known as Olokai,
Oh, bravo.
advanced creatures bred by the Dark Lord to serve as soldiers,
Non c'avevo neanche voglia di
guards, and even
cliccare.
overlords in some cases. When questioned by IGN about
il
the
Nemesis
smarter race
System è
of troll,
proprietario di
Duplata
Warner.
mentioned that Olokai were born out of Monolith's continued desire to explore power struggles and the hierarchy that forms around them.
Shadow, secondo me è
Shadow
un bel
of
gioco.
Mordor
E
featured a
insomma,
similarly elite enemy type with the
secondo me è
Uruk-hai.
uno di quei giochi
For
che
the
devi
sequel, there existed an
prendere
emphasis
casomai
on
molto
eschewing the
scontato.
cliché of mountain trolls. Sauron would want his forces to be filled with nothing shy of the best and brightest, after all. And because they would be incorporated into the overhauled Nemesis system, it only made sense for the Olokai to boast memorable personalities. Warhammer 40K's Space Marines inspired the build and battle prowess of the smarter breed of trolls. Meanwhile, developers modeled their character traits after pop culture figures such as Batman villains, most of whom exhibit exaggerated psychological traits that usually exist in some opposite form to the vigilante. Monolith knew scaling up Talion's enemies required more than added formidability and intrigue. An improved Nemesis system only benefited the experience so much if the gameplay itself failed to keep pace. Therefore, the development crew set about addressing game difficulty, another issue that plagued the action in Shadow of Mordor. Players feeling ridiculously overpowered by the end of the game was no accident, according to Duplata.
Infatti.
On the contrary, the limited scope of the project pushed developers in that direction. 3 difficulty levels, easy, normal, and hard, were introduced in the second title to better balance the gameplay. Orcs and their combat-related attributes also received a healthy dose of balance tweaks between projects. The arbitrary dice rolls that govern Shadow of Mordor's Nemesis traits sometimes created space for some orcs to present as impossible-to-beat obstacles. Shadow of War integrated what Duplata dubbed more advanced enemy classes, complete with a greater variation of characteristics that boasted the addition of tribe bonuses, as well as deeper class-specific traits.
Già.
Naturally, the gameplay rework equally benefited the player character from an offensive standpoint.
E tutto questo
Monolith
è bellissimo.
Talion and
Cioè,
Celebrimbor's
allora,
suite of abilities enough that
qui ragazzi voglio fare una piccola pausa io. Hanno creato una situazione in cui veramente c'era una ricchezza di layer di gestione dei seguaci, dei castelli, delle cose, cioè tutto potenzialmente veramente una figata colossale. C'è un problema con tutto questo, che il bilanciamento del sistema era stato lasciato in balia della presenza delle microtransazioni, perché purtroppo nel secondo gioco inizialmente poi le hanno tolte, dopo la rivolta che c'è stata da parte di tutti, me compreso, che praticamente nell'ultima parte del gioco, in cui devi letteralmente prendere il controllo della regione del mondo con i tuoi seguaci, conquistando i castelli, eccetera, eccetera, ci sono tutti i livelli, ci sono tutti i potenziamenti, tutte le cose da fare, e potevi letteralmente comprare gli scrigni con i seguaci di livello alto e i potenziamenti, con soldi veri. E il gioco era volutamente grindoso per invogliarti a comprare gli scrigni con la gente potente, praticamente. E questo ha completamente sputtanato la percezione di bilanciamento del sistema, che altrimenti era fighissimo. Io mi ricordo che in quel momento Shadow War è passato per me dall'essere un gioco da 9, veramente incredibile, all'essere un gioco da 5. Rovinato completamente sul più bello da questa meccanica qui. Una delle più grandi, proprio folli introduzioni di microtransazioni probabilmente della storia dei videogiochi. Veramente una cazzata micidiale e anche una oscenità. Veramente una cosa da non fare. Sì, all'epoca feci un video proprio incazzato come una biscia. Avevo il canale da non molto. Sì. Sì, me lo ricordo bene. Chissà se ne parla.
Even foes with a seemingly impossible combination of winning attributes could be taken down several pegs. An added layer of customization buttressed by a gear system that modified everything from Talion's health to attack power further refined the balancing problems of old.
Dio, c'erano dei livelli veramente tosti, e però anche una possibilità di diventare potentissimi. E giocato intelligentemente una cosa poteva andare avanti molto molto bene. Potevi sconfiggere della gente potentissima.
You fight for Mordor! You fight for the Bright Lord!
È bello rivederlo quel video. Beh, c'è ancora online. La mia recensione
A
di
retailer
Shadow
listing
War.
on Target's
Già.
online storefront leaked Middle-earth Shadow of War the day before the official reveal in February 2017. The actual announcement promised Talion and his ghostly companion would return that August in another original Middle-earth adventure to fend off Sauron with an orc army. New stealth, ranged, and wraith abilities would aid the two heroes in their cause, along with the inclusion of a rideable Drake. Plus, Tolkien faithful were assured Sauron and the Nazgul played a much bigger role, partly due to an emphasis on exploring the histories of the latter and their relationship to the Ring of Power. WB and Monolith postponed Shadow of War's August 2017 launch date to October, citing a need for more time to deliver the highest quality experience. Though the title released on PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One as intended that fall, it did so amidst a quagmire of confusion. For one, controversial dual endings raised questions about the nature of the game's true conclusion. The main story drew to a close in traditional fashion. However, a second ending lay hidden behind endgame content named Shadow Wars, which tasked players with defending their fortresses from invaders across 20 grindy siege stages.
Esatto.
Michael Duplata addressed the criticism during a post-mortem conversation with VentureBeat, explaining that Monolith hadn't envisioned the post-Shadow Wars scene as the true conclusion, and instead considered it a bonus ending, comparable to the end credit sequences in superhero films. That fans only achieved the Nightfall Protocol ending in Batman Arkham Knight after finding all 243 Riddler trophies constituted another reference point. The Shadow of War developer contended that since so few people actually play games that extensively, the bonus ending angle felt right. A patch deployed in July 2018 revamped the endgame offering by streamlining the extra story content into an epilogue that was much less tedium to complete. On top of conceding to complaints about the narrative, this specific change additionally helped resolve the microtransaction controversy deeply woven into the fabric of the otherwise well-received Lord of the Rings game.
Ed è esattamente quello che vi dicevo. La parte finale del gioco, che è, se vogliamo, la chiosa di tutto quanto, quello che doveva nobilitare il gioco, si è trasformato nella fiera del grind, dove se non spendevi dei soldi nei forzieri o cose del genere era veramente difficile riuscire a difendere e conquistare tutti quanti i castelli. Era un casino e io ho provato a farlo senza spendere un soldo ed era una follia, e un gioco che era perfettamente bilanciato, divertente e coinvolgente fino a quel momento diventava un grind pazzesco, a meno che non spendessi un sacco di soldi per piazzare della gente molto molto potente tirata fuori dagli scrigni pagati con microtransazioni e piazzata nei vari castelli per combattere contro le orde di Sauron. Praticamente questo, no? Una patch ha praticamente rimosso questa dinamica delle microtransazioni e messo ordine alla cosa, ma a distanza di parecchio tempo. Io avevo bello che finito il gioco, anzi mi ero rifiutato di continuare e bella lì. Pensate un po' che cazzata micidiale che hanno fatto. Tutto per avere del denaro in più.
The uproar concerning Shadow of War's microtransactions initially made the rounds in August 2017, when WB Games revealed an in-game store packed with bundles, loot chests, war chests, and XP boosts. Loot chests provided gear items like armor, and war chests contained orc allies, all of varying rarity.
Esatto, quello che vi
Meanwhile,
dicevo.
XP boosts offered a quicker way to level up Talion. The first details noted these items would be purchasable with either Mirian or gold, the former constituting currency obtained through gameplay. On the other hand, the gold used for unlocking higher tier chests required real-world money purchases, though hitting certain milestones and partaking in community challenges awarded the premium currency in incremental amounts. To mitigate the inevitable community unrest, WB Games assured fans they could earn everything worth gold by engaging with the experience at no extra cost. The publisher's blog post on the matter stated in part, "No gold purchases are necessary to enjoy the complete game experience."
E questa è una grandissima cazzata, perché tecnicamente è vero, non è necessario spendere soldi per finire il gioco, ma finire il gioco diventa un dito in culo micidiale se non spendi dei soldi. Perché o sei davvero bravissimo, o spendi un sacco di tempo a grindare come un pazzo, oppure spendi soldi. E se sei una persona normale che vuole giocare in relativa tranquillità, pure con impegno, e non spendi soldi, il gioco a quel punto diventa un grind micidiale, veramente così, che ti dovrebbe invogliare quindi a spendere dei soldi per avere l'equip migliore e i seguaci più forti. Pensa te.
Design director Bob Roberts issued reassurances weeks ahead of launch while speaking with Eurogamer at EGX 2017, insisting loot box integration had no adverse influence on game design.
Assolutamente
Roberts
falso.
additionally told the outlet that playtesting for Shadow of War never included loot boxes or their equivalent options, so all involved knew they were balancing around an experience which is rewarding without any of that stuff. When pressed about why microtransactions were added in general, the design director merely argued the purchasing options existed as another form of player choice akin to the introduction of difficulty modes. He called the industry-wide loot box problem complicated altogether, and bemoaned how the conversations surrounding in-game purchases had become a distraction that loomed over the final stretch leading up to Shadow of War's fall debut. Things worsened in this respect as time wore on, too, especially once the review embargo lifted in early October. Most reviewers said loot boxes were little more than an unnecessary distraction, since the vast majority of gear items and orc followers were unlockable through gameplay. Still, misunderstandings about how in-game purchases functioned resulted in one claim suggesting the best followers were locked behind a paywall. Other talking points indicated the so-called true ending encouraged users to avoid the tedious endgame grind by spending real money. But as more people went hands-on, it became clear that frustrating RNG and punishing tedium in a system that demanded players devote extensive effort into side content was the name of the game. Either way, Monolith faced accusations that it purposefully designed a time-consuming grind to sell items and boosters via the in-game shop.
It is a a single player game, so to buy, like, there's XP boosts and kind of things that you can buy.
It's bullshit. They need to stop doing it, and I don't know who condones this anymore. There's some of you out there who still do.
Not a damn one of you goes, you know what Middle-earth needs? Middle-earth needs microtransactions! Don't need it! That's...
The company finally revealed plans to address the criticism in the middle of Shadow of War's
Grigio,
post-launch
quanto
DLC
tempo.
release schedule. A statement shared in April 2008.
Comunque voglio tagliare la questione. Credetemi, è proprio così. L'ho giocato, l'ho visto molto da vicino. Quella parte diventa un grind pazzesco che ti invoglia a comprare i forzieri. Poi l'hanno cambiato. Ma vi posso garantire che era proprio così. Quindi chi ha detto che no, ma non è vero che ti serve... No, tecnicamente è vero che non ti serve, ma stai mentendo se stai dicendo che è ininfluente.
18 conceded the point critics and fans had made for months, that the ability to purchase orcs in the market undermined the Nemesis system, and thus diminished
Tra
the
parentesi,
immersion.
sì.
In an
Ma questo è il
attempt to
meno.
fully restore the promise of the Nemesis system, Monolith removed gold war chests and the in-game market from the sequel in May 2018.
Esatto,
And as of an
poi hanno
update
tolto
last
tutto.
July, players could no longer spend previously purchased gold. A
Esatto. Che oltretutto
move that officially excised the final remnants of Shadow of War's microtransactions.
le hanno tolte completamente. Dopo tipo un anno. O giù di lì, non mi ricordo quanto ci hanno messo. Però parecchio. Io avevo finito il gioco già da un bel po'. O meglio, non finito. Mi ero fermato volutamente lì. No, il grind l'hanno poi ribilanciato. Non era più così grindoso, a dimostrazione del fatto che era fatto apposta. Giusto come conferma.
Thanks to the 4 expansions deployed between October
Quindi,
2017 and May 2018,
miracolosamente
the
adesso invece si poteva fare.
controversy didn't totally dominate the game's post-release period. Players particularly favored the Desolation of Mordor content, starring a playable Baranor in a story campaign set deep within the eastern desert of Mordor. Like the Game of the Year edition for Shadow of Mordor, the follow-up entry hit stores again with a definitive edition, packing all DLC in one bundle. The loot box drama may have stained Shadow of War's reputation,
Posso dire una cosa
such
che
that it
è
became
schifo? Sì,
synonymous
quello è,
with the
uno,
discussion.
quello è stato proprio uno degli esempi di vero schifo. Perché è stato fatto proprio volutamente. Questo non è un... Ci sono le microtransazioni e ti invogliano a comprarle perché ci mettono le cose belle e poi si basano sul tuo hype e invogliano i giocatori a comprare cose inutili a un prezzo troppo alto, no? Di cui si discute spesso. No, questa era proprio una meccanica di gioco resa volutamente frustrante e ai limiti del grind assoluto, apposta per invogliarti a comprare le microtransazioni per ovviare a questo grind. No, questo era proprio così. Questo è probabilmente uno degli episodi di schifo con le microtransazioni più grandi che ci siano stati nel mondo dei videogiochi.
About microtransactions at large. Yet, the title still enjoyed commercial highs, having sold a reported 3 million copies in its first year.
Cioè, Genshin Impact e Fortnite al confronto sono estremamente etici con le microtransazioni. Giusto per far capire a che livello è questo che vorrei sottolineare.
Alone. Such an achievement seemingly did nothing to bolster Monolith's desire to revisit Middle-earth. In an appearance on the Kinda Funny Gamescast in February 2025,
A questo livello? Sì,
Bloomberg...
assolutamente a questo livello. Assolutamente sì. E questo è il mio problema. È che è finito dentro un calderone di discussioni sulle microtransazioni che ha completamente non reso l'idea su quanto grave è stato questo episodio qua. Qui l'hanno proprio fatto apposta. Perché poi le hanno tolte e hanno ribilanciato il grind. Ops! Ma guarda un po', quindi era possibile farlo. No, hanno proprio messo una cosa... Cioè, per esempio, nei giochi Ubisoft e negli Assassin's Creed c'è lo store. E ci sono pure i bonus per l'esperienza. Però, il gioco base, quello di Assassin's Creed, tutta la main storyline e gran parte delle secondarie, te le puoi fare tranquillamente pure senza comprare questi bonus. Lo fai se lo vuoi fare. Secondo me è una dinamica un po' tossica comunque, però è comunque limitata, ha davvero l'ambito di un qualcosa in più. Perciò diciamo che possono essere rese tollerabili, ma qui erano invece una dinamica ben specifica.
Journalist Jason
Vieni in testa,
Schreier claimed
buonasera.
the studio started pursuing a new endeavor
Bentrovato.
beyond the Tolkien IP after shipping Shadow of War. Codenamed Legacy, the mystery project allegedly explored
Stesso gioco di microtransazioni e piattaforme mobile. Quella è una cosa ancora diversa, sai perché? Perché i giochi mobile sono free to play, se non altro. E quelli più etici ti consentono di fare gran parte del gioco sostanzialmente gratis. Lì le microtransazioni hanno senso perché si basano sulla tua volontà di essere coinvolto nel gioco in una certa maniera. Certo, poi lì c'è tutta la dinamica della pressione psicologica e del tentativo predatorio di farti spendere soldi in una maniera o nell'altra, ma all'atto pratico, se non sei uno completamente in balia delle proprie emozioni e non in grado di controllarsi, gran parte dei giochi mobile o dei giochi free to play li puoi francamente giocare senza spendere un euro o spendendo molto poco. Qui invece era diversa la questione. E oltretutto è un gioco venduto a prezzo pieno, eh?
Based on the Nemesis system and remained in the works for roughly 3 years. Warner Brothers erred on the side of avoiding new IP, however, preferring that its subsidiaries focus on producing interactive experiences for existing WB-owned properties. After years of stringing the studio along with meetings that went nowhere, WB Brass pulled the plug on Legacy in the spring of 2021. Monolith's entire leadership group and several junior employees departed shortly thereafter, many joining forces with Electronic Arts to open Cliffhanger Games, the crew behind the Black Panther title announced in 2023.
Esatto.
The staffers left behind at Monolith were forced to manage the sudden status quo shift, all while rebuilding the team and taking on their next licensed undertaking. Despite only existing in the earliest stages of pre-production, the Shadow of Mordor developer unveiled Wonder Woman during the 2021 Game Awards,
vi ricordate?
presumably to attract talent
Io era un
the
gioco che
studio
aspettavo
sorely
tantissimo.
needed. Similar to Legacy, the action game starring the DC superhero underwent
Di
a
Black
grueling
Panther probabilmente
iterative
non era un
process to
granché.
no avail. Years of mismanagement within
Da quello che si è
WB's gaming
capito.
division led to the February 2025 closure of Monolith Productions and the cancellation of Wonder Woman.
Questa è probabilmente una delle chiusure che mi ha fatto più male. Purtroppo però c'è anche da dire che non è che Monolith sia proprio, come dire, innocente al riguardo. Purtroppo mi dispiace dirlo perché ho passato gran parte del video a dirvi che li adoro questi giochi, però vi ho anche detto che hanno fatto delle cose, tipo quelle in particolare.
Corporate indecision and too many false starts irreparably harmed Monolith in the long run. Yet the harm to Middle-earth drifts beyond the adventures of Talion and Celebrimbor. The franchise's game-changing Nemesis system rejuvenated an age-old genre, then lost at least some of its shine once loot boxes were haphazardly thrown into the mix. Subsequent attempts by Monolith to redeem and elevate the signature mechanic fell apart. Worst still, in February 2021, Warner Brothers secured the patent for the Nemesis system following multiple rejections, preventing other developers from recreating the feature unless they pay licensing fees to the Shadow of Mordor publisher. Pundits and game enthusiasts alike have lambasted the patent as a selfish act that stifles progress across the industry at large. And without Monolith Productions around to iterate on its own creation, many have lost faith in the Nemesis system resurfacing in any meaningful capacity before
E purtroppo
WB's
sono
hold
d'accordo
on the
anch'io.
patent
David Spy,
lapses.
grazie mille della sub.
Perhaps J.R.R. Tolkien's adage proves true outside the confines of storytelling. Perhaps there truly cannot be a story without a flaw.
Che peccato. Buonasera Reggissimo, buonasera. Sì, il Nemesis System purtroppo pare sia morto. Però ora onestamente, ragazzi, c'è anche una possibilità.
We'd like to take
Mo vi
this
dico,
time to thank, by name, the generous Patreons who have pledged to our
Esatto,
Hall of
questo è
Fame
un video
reward
visto
tier.
sul canale di Gamers,
This
ragazzi,
Cobra
quindi
2013.
adesso fermo il video, però per non far passare i titoli di coda che sono piuttosto noiosi, ma lo faccio io per loro. Andate a fare un bel like e un'iscrizione al canale di Gamers con la V, perché se lo meritano, fanno dei gran bei contenuti e perciò andateli a supportare, d'accordo? Io voglio concludere questa cosa dicendovi che purtroppo una parte del destino di Monolith è colpa delle scelte fatte, no? Ed è facile dare sempre la colpa alla dirigenza, ma la dirigenza non è che ti dice devi fare una determinata cosa. Ormai l'abbiamo capito molto bene come funzionano le cose, no? Cioè danno dei pitch, delle correzioni, dei pareri e magari danno l'ok o non l'ok, ma io non credo che sia stata Warner a fargli mettere le microtransazioni. No. È stata una scelta loro, credendo di fare così il bene del gioco e di rendere Warner contenta, probabilmente. Ma non so se è andata letteralmente così, ma in altri casi invece è andata così. E quindi, ragazzi, purtroppo non mi sento di dire che non sia stata una caduta in parte meritata, perché una figura di merda del genere la si paga molto 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 cara. E se da lì poi non hai più delle idee interessanti o non ti danno l'ok per altri progetti che vanno in questa direzione, perché hanno perso un po', diciamo, il focus su certi obiettivi, o hanno perso la prospettiva del voler vedere avere successo, del voler vedere il successo di certi franchise fatti in un certo modo. Qual è il risultato? È che alla fine lo studio viene chiuso perché non costa tanto, è di primo ordine, ma non fa più delle cose che ritieni valide abbastanza. Secondo me ha torto, perché invece il potenziale c'era, però tant'è. E oltretutto da Monolith se ne erano andati praticamente tutti quelli bravi già da un bel po' di tempo, quindi è così. Ora, io vi dico la verità, sono molto diciamo pessimista riguardo a queste cose e non penso proprio che rivedremo più il Nemesis System né qualcosa del genere. Detto questo, ragazzi, non è che siccome cambia proprietario o cambia publisher e adesso probabilmente in futuro sarà tutto sotto il cappello di Netflix, questo non vuol dire che non possano accadere delle belle cose. Sapete qual è la cosa più probabile che accada? Secondo me? La cosa più probabile che accada è che si uniscano due cose. La prima è il fatto che Rocksteady è al lavoro su un nuovo Batman e questo lo sappiamo per bocca di Jason Schreier. Non si sa se è un seguito o un remake. Secondo me un remake o entrambe le cose, secondo la formula ormai collaudata del è un franchise promettente, ma non siamo sicuri di voler fare un seguito. Facciamo prima un remake, vediamo come va e poi casomai facciamo un seguito. La strategia Capcom, no? Come con Resident Evil. Esatto. E il che vuol dire che faranno un remake probabilmente di Batman Arkham Asylum. Ok? Se quello va bene, e secondo me andrà bene, se lo dovessero fare venderà, secondo me andrà molto bene, poi magari scelgono di fare davvero un nuovo Batman Arkham. E però, attenzione, nel momento in cui fai un nuovo Batman Arkham, nuovo di pacca, un seguito, non un remake, perché non ci puoi mettere il Nemesis System? È tuo. Era solo di uno studio diverso, ma hai tu la proprietà del Nemesis System, no? Dalla Rocksteady e ci fanno un nuovo Batman. Questo vuol dire che probabilmente non vedremmo più un nuovo L'Ombra di Mordor, o un nuovo L'Ombra della Guerra, o un nuovo La Terra di Mezzo, l'Ombra di. Peccato, perché io lo vorrei, ma probabilmente le due cose si possono unire in un nuovo prodotto di Batman che secondo me arriverà dopo un remake, ok? Secondo la strategia che vi ho detto prima, è più che collaudata nell'industria e funziona. Quindi ragazzi, io sono in genere pessimista su questo fatto qui, però se voglio essere più positivo e immaginare un qualcosa per il futuro, sì, potrebbero usare un Nemesis System in Batman. Sì, perché non possono usare un Nemesis System in Batman? È pieno di... Cioè, immagina un nuovo cattivone, un Bane all'interno di Batman, che come in Batman, cioè il Cavaliere Oscuro Il Ritorno, c'è un Bane con la sua cerchia e sotto una serie di altre persone che lavorano tecnicamente per lui, perché non si può usare il Nemesis System per quello? All'interno di una Gotham City in rivolta, tipo, che Batman sta piano piano cercando di ripulire? Si può fare, no? Si potrebbe tranquillamente fare. E secondo me sarebbe una bomba questa cosa, esatto. Quindi incrociate le dita con me che vada esattamente così.